Hey, amazing viewers, I love connecting with you all around the world. Stay with me until the end, because what I'm about to share will leave you inspired and ready to take control of your own life. In today's story, you'll hear about an incredible twist that no one saw coming. Also, if this is your first time here, press the subscribe button and join our incredible journey. It was one of those days where everything felt ordinary, but the events inside that courtroom were anything but. You know how life sometimes throws you an unexpected curveball, a moment so surreal that you can't help but question whether it's truly happening. Well, I was sitting in the Los Angeles County Courthouse when one such moment unfolded right before my eyes. It was a normal Tuesday morning, or so I thought. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that presses down on you, making every second seem drawn out. The gallery was buzzing with spectators, many of them whispering, some simply waiting for the day's proceedings to unfold. On the surface, this was just another case in a long list of trials, but there was something about this one that had the audience on edge. The young man standing at the defendant's table didn't seem like someone who belonged in a courtroom. He was just 19, his frame too small for the adult-sized table before him. His posture wasn't slouched like most teenagers, nor was it defensive. He stood there with his hands in his pockets, his chin lifted just enough to show he wasn't intimidated. His name was Jalen Dawson, and he was accused of grand theft auto and resisting arrest. But as the proceedings began, I couldn't help but feel that this case wasn't about what it appeared to be. No, this wasn't a typical courtroom drama. And I quickly realized that Jalen was no ordinary defendant. Judge Walter Grayson, a seasoned veteran of the bench, seemed to think so as well, though for entirely different reasons. Judge Grayson leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming against the polished wood of his desk as he glanced down at Jalen with a smirk. "You think you're some kind of legal expert?" Grayson's voice rang out, laced with dry amusement. "This isn't a debate club, kid." A few chuckles rippled through the room. The prosecutor, Mitchell Carrington, who was clearly used to winning with ease, had a grin on his face. Even the stenographer seemed to be enjoying the spectacle. Jalen didn't flinch. Instead, he remained calm, his face unreadable. As the judge continued, you could feel the weight of his words press down on Jalen. It was as if Grayson had already made up his mind about the young man. "Let's make this quick," he sighed, flipping open the case file. "I have a golf game at 2. The room chuckled again, but this time something shifted. Jalen's lips curled into a slight, almost imperceptible smirk. It was a small change in his expression, but one that carried an immense amount of meaning. At that moment, I realized that Jalen wasn't intimidated. He wasn't afraid. In fact, he wasn't just some kid who had gotten caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was something more, something that no one in that room could have anticipated. I leaned in, watching closely, feeling the tension start to build. The battle had only just begun, and Jalen was about to do something that no one expected, something that would turn the entire courtroom upside down. But before the fireworks would come, there was a moment of silence, and in that pause, Jalen did something that I'm sure no one in that courtroom will ever forget. He spoke, and the world as they knew it began to change. I'll never forget the stillness that hung in the air right before Jalen spoke. It was as if time itself had stopped, the entire courtroom holding its breath, waiting for something extraordinary to unfold. It wasn't just the weight of the case that had shifted, but the very atmosphere in the room. The spectators who had been laughing moments before now sat on the edge of their seats, sensing that something big was about to happen. Jalen, with his hands still in his pockets, broke the silence. He took a slow step forward, his eyes locked on Judge Grayson. His voice, when it came, was calm and steady, betraying none of the tension that hung in the room. "Your Honor," he began, "before I begin, I'd like to confirm something with the prosecution." The courtroom stilled even further, if that was possible. Prosecutor Mitchell Carrington, who had been so confident just moments ago, raised an eyebrow and crossed his arms. He was clearly unbothered, thinking that this was just another attempt by the defendant to stall or play games. He looked at Jalen as though he were a child about to make a silly mistake. "Go ahead," Carrington said, clearly dismissing him. Jalen didn't waver. He wasn't playing games. He wasn't here for theatrics. He had been preparing for this moment his entire life. "You said Officer Daniel Ruiz personally saw me behind the wheel before I was arrested, correct?" Jalen asked, his gaze unwavering. Carrington, clearly growing impatient, snapped, "Yes, that's right." Jalen's next words were like a shot fired in the dark, the kind of statement that rattled everything. "And that testimony is written in his report, right?" Carrington nodded, still confident. "Of course it is." Jalen shifted, stepping just a little closer. "Then I move to dismiss that testimony as evidence." A ripple of confusion passed through the room. You could hear the collective murmurs as everyone tried to figure out what exactly Jalen was claiming. The judge squinted at him, the tension rising as the silence deepened. "On what grounds?" Grayson asked, a little annoyed at being caught off guard. Jalen stood taller now, his words slow but deliberate, slicing through the tension. "Because Officer Ruiz was never on duty when the chase began. In fact, he wasn't even in the area. His report says he saw me in the vehicle, but if that's true, then the GPS data should match his location." Carrington's expression faltered for just a split second. He didn't seem to know how to respond. But the damage was done. Jalen had thrown the first stone, and the entire case had shifted from a simple car theft to something far more complicated. It was a challenge that no one had anticipated. "Your Honor," Jalen continued, "I'd like to request the GPS logs from Officer Ruiz's shift that night. If his report is correct, then the data should prove it." The murmurs grew louder. The prosecutor, who had been so sure of his case, now looked uncomfortable. Grayson, leaning forward, couldn't hide the flicker of curiosity in his eyes. He turned to Carrington, his tone suddenly serious. "Counselor, does the prosecution have any objections to verifying Officer Ruiz's GPS logs?" Carrington hesitated. The pause, long enough for the jury to notice, told everyone in the room what they needed to know. He finally managed a stiff, "No objections, Your Honor," but it was too late. Jalen had already planted the seed of doubt. At that moment, the whole courtroom understood. This wasn't just some teenager caught in a bad situation. This was a young man who had been silently studying the law for years, learning its flaws, its loopholes, and its weaknesses. And now he was using it against them. As the proceedings moved forward, the sense of disbelief that had hung in the air earlier was replaced with something more profound: respect. The case, which had seemed so clear-cut, was now anything but. Jalen had just taken control, and everyone knew it. What had started as a simple trial was quickly becoming a battle of minds. And in this battle, Jalen wasn't just a defendant. He was a force to be reckoned with. The power of knowledge. The room fell into a heavy silence, the kind that comes with a moment of realization. As the tension built, it wasn't just the weight of the case that hung in the air. It was something deeper, something far more profound. Jalen Dawson had done the unthinkable. The courtroom, once filled with skepticism and condescension, now buzzed with a quiet understanding. This was no ordinary teenager. He wasn't just defending himself against a set of charges. He was dismantling an entire system with the precision of someone who had studied every corner of it. As the proceedings continued, it became clear that this wasn't a matter of simply proving his innocence. No, Jalen was showing something far more significant: the power of preparation, of understanding, and of having the courage to stand up, even when everyone else thinks you're out of your depth. Judge Grayson, who had initially looked at Jalen with amusement and dismissiveness, now watched him with an almost grudging respect. The smirk was gone, replaced by the quiet contemplation of someone who had just witnessed something extraordinary. The case that had seemed so simple, so clear-cut, was now unraveling before everyone's eyes. Jalen didn't stop there. He knew how important every moment in that courtroom was. He knew that every word, every argument, could tilt the balance. He kept asking questions, making connections, pulling at threads that no one else thought to pull. His calmness, his sharp logic, left no room for doubt. The final blow came when Jalen, with a quiet but firm voice, read from the statement of the car's owner. A simple detail, one that the prosecution had conveniently ignored, shattered their entire case. The car's owner had admitted to leaving the vehicle running and unattended. The prosecution had never brought that up. And the most shocking part, the person the police had arrested didn't even match the description of the actual thief. In that moment, Jalen didn't just prove that he wasn't guilty. He exposed how the system could fail. He revealed how assumptions and shortcuts could lead to devastating consequences, especially when someone wasn't willing to question what was handed to them. He didn't just win his case, he made the room face uncomfortable truths. As the judge called for a recess to review the evidence, Jalen stood quietly, his hands in his pockets, a look of quiet determination on his face. No one was laughing now. The weight of what had just transpired settled over everyone like a wave. This was not a moment that could be easily forgotten. When the judge returned, the verdict was clear. The charges were dismissed. There was no case, and in that moment, something changed in the courtroom. What had been a simple legal battle had transformed into something much bigger. It was a lesson in perseverance, in the quiet power of knowledge, and in the courage to stand up when no one believes you can. The most powerful lesson of all, Jalen had shown that the truth doesn't always lie in the surface-level story. It lies in the details, in the preparation, and in the willingness to fight, even when everyone expects you to fail. He didn't win because he had luck on his side. He didn't win because he was lucky enough to be right. He won because he had spent years understanding, studying, and preparing himself for a moment like this. And in doing so, he proved something invaluable, that with determination, preparation, and knowledge, anything is possible. In the end, Jalen Dawson didn't just walk out of that courtroom as a free man. He walked out as a reminder to all of us. Knowledge is power, and sometimes, the most underestimated voices are the ones that have the most to teach.